Hi, everyone. Welcome to the campus town hall. We are just letting folks in right now. It is 11:59 a.m. We will get started no later than 12:02. We know we have a packed agenda. We know you have lots of questions, and we want to get to as many of those as we possibly can. So hang with us for about 3 minutes, and we will get this started. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I am the first presentation that will kick us off. I do see a question in chat from Melissa Cordoba. Melissa, this is a webinar, so we will not be able to hear you. So you're okay. Yep, Allison Palmer, it's a webinar. So the only folks who have the ability to be on camera or to speak are the panelists that have been elevated to that spot. So you're good. Don't worry about the dogs barking or the phone ringing. You're fine. I hear you. I'm right there with you. I'm really hoping the UPS person doesn't knock on my front door. All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and let's get started. The first thing I want to say is this session is being recorded. It's being recorded for a very important reason. Our webinar license is capped at 500. We have 500 participants today. So we are recording this, and it will be available later today on the Staff Assembly Facebook page. Welcome to the Campus Town Hall. This is presented by Staff Assembly. As you already saw, and as you can see from the screen, we are joined by Gerry Bomotti, Vice Chancellor, Planning, Budget, and Administration, and our Chief Financial Officer, and John Stephen Henderson, Interim Associate Vice Chancellor and Chief Human Resources Officer. There are other panelists on this call as well. You will get to know them as you ask your questions. Beyond the panelists, there are also several folks from Staff Assembly who will be helping us today. I did want to call them out. Vice President, President-elect Agam Patel, and Director of Professional Development, Loretta Vanderveer, will be moderating the Q&A that'll come up a little later. Melanie Ramiro, who is our Director of Marketing Communications, will be fielding all of your chat questions. And then lastly, Dennis McIver, our immediate past president, he's just here to really make sure we don't screw this up. He's had a lot of successful town halls in the past, and I can tell you that we all feel a lot more secure when we know Dennis is there for that support. Before we get to the Q&A, because we know that is the most important part of what we're going to be doing, we did want to do a couple of presentations. So I'm going to show you what we have here. I'm going to start by just doing about 5 minutes on something called HEERF funding. You may have heard about it, but it's about $1.7 million we were able to get allocated for staff on campus. I will be followed by a 10-minute presentation on the remote work survey. That'll be from Lorena Velasquez, who is the HR implementation project manager. And then from there, we'll get into the Q&A. I would ask you, please don't put your questions in chat. Please use the Q&A feature. You can type your question, and then you also have the ability to vote up or vote down questions. We will ask them in the order that they are prioritized. So if a question gets the most votes, that question will be first. If we are unable to get to all of your questions by 1:30, we will take the questions that we don't answer, and we'll put them in writing. We will ask our panelists to provide answers to those questions, and then via email, we'll send out a link, a CAS authenticated link where you can get those questions. You can see those answers and see those questions. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I mentioned HEERF funding. HEERF funding is federal funds from the federal government that were allocated specifically to mitigate COVID loss. Most of that funding is going toward for the students and student experience, but there is part of that that has been allocated for staff as well. Provost Elizabeth Watkins had invited staff assembly to have representation on the campus finance committee. In my role as president of staff assembly, I sit on that campus finance committee, and working with Chief Financial Officer Gerry Bomotti and the rest of the committee, we were able to get the following approved: a staff pantry, remote work, mental health funding, and funding for professional development for a total of $1.765 million. That all of that money is specifically for UCR staff. The following slides are really going to break it down for you a little more than what's there. But before we get started, I do want to give you some idea of where those funds came from and how they're being used. So all of them are intended as one-time federal funds. So we're not going to get this 1.7 million again. This is a one-time funding, again, to mitigate COVID loss. It's for all staff. It's not for just represented staff or policy covered staff. It's for all of our 2,900 UCR staff. And we didn't do this in a bubble. We actually had dozens and dozens of conversations with folks from bargaining units, from human resources, from IT, from student affairs. If we thought that there was somebody who was somehow connected to any of these areas, we had a conversation with them, and really we relied on their expertise to provide direction. But we also pointed this out to the campus finance committee that these funds don't resolve our significant staffing crisis. I think before the pandemic, we were about 750 staff understaffed as in comparison to other UC campuses. Since the pandemic, those numbers have only gone up. So this is really only to serve the staff we already have. And this is not something that, campus leadership, they are aware of this. In fact, they're on board with this as well. But that future planning must include specific permanent funding to address these ongoing staffing issues. So let's start with our pantry. A lot of you are probably familiar with the Our Pantry. That is our emergency food service to students. We are going to use one-time funds to expand our pantry for staff access as well. We are still working through the details on that. We're working with folks in student affairs, folks who run the Our Pantry. We're hoping to give you specific details on how we're going to do this beginning in October at our October 20th general meeting. But the idea is that there will be dedicated staff hours where staff can go to the pantry and get emergency food. We're pretty excited about this. It's our understanding we're only the third UC to offer this, in addition to UCLA and Berkeley. And that comes at a total cost of about $134,000. Secondly, this is a big one, and we're going to hear more about this from Lorena when she talks about the survey. But we were able to get we were able to get $1 million approved for remote work funding. That's everything from laptops to keyboards to mice. That money has already been allocated. It's been allocated to every college, every unit. Each college and unit will be responsible for how they're going to disperse those funds to their folks. But we realize that remote work is something that's not going away. And we want to make sure that equipment is not a reason to not say yes to remote work. We're also looking into expanding mental health and wellness resources. This is something we're working with our mental health and wellness folks in human resources. We're still getting an idea of how we're going to do it, but we've got $250,000 to figure it out. So it's going to be a mixture of online resources, things like CompSci, but we're also going to do some in-person events. We're going to do some programming, some speakers. Hopefully, as COVID restrictions lift a little bit, we'll be able to offer some things that are a little more of a personal touch than just having to do things online or by phone. And then lastly, we're going to offer about $381,000 in professional development. We're working with Leila Dennis, who works in human resources, and she's already got a great idea of how that money is going to be spent. As you can see, in instructional designer, learning and development, our staff conference, which more than 500 of you came to last year. We're hoping to be able to do that in person. It'll be next March. Training materials, we're also working with University Extension as well. So we'll be able to offer a certain amount of certifications free of charge to our UCR staff. But we're just getting started. The good news is that we've got $1.7 million that we can spend on our staff, but there's still more planning and rollout to come. We will be sharing that with you in the following months. The good news is we've already started those conversations. Everything's trending in the right direction. And you'll hear more from Staff Assembly, either meetings like this, our general meeting October 20th. We also have the the monthly newsletter and our social media as well. So stay tuned, more to come. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to Lorena, who's going to talk about the staff survey that was sent out to about 2,900 staff in July. So Lorena, it's all yours.
Good afternoon. As Jeff mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the Staff Flexible Work Survey. This is a survey that was done in conjunction with the UCR Operational Continuity Work Group. And the objective of the survey was to develop recommendations to UCR leadership to include alternate ways of working, office planning, and other considerations. The survey design is in sort of 5 areas, and that design includes how staff employees worked prior to the pandemic, their current work arrangements, some of the factors that may have influenced future work location preferences, and also gathering preferences from supervisors and managers regarding the future of work arrangements. So hopefully all of you on this call had an opportunity to see the survey. For those of you who have not, there should be a link that Melanie is going to be sharing with you to the actual survey itself. It's about a 23-page presentation, but I'm just going to go over a few of the first few slides. The survey was conducted back in mid-June and it ended on June 28th, and that was sent to about 2,800 staff employees. It was for anyone that had been hired as of June 8th and prior to that. The response rate was really high considering the industry average is about 30%. We had a 47% response rate, which is really helpful in ensuring that we have statistics to provide backup to some of the information that we received. The breakup of those that responded, 903 were individual contributors and 416 were supervisors and managers. Depending upon how you answer some of the pre-questions to the survey, you received either 15 or 17 questions to be answered. And just a little bit more statistics here. Prior to the campus closure, we had, again, these are just from respondents, on-site workers, about 1,100 on-site workers, and there was about 73 of the respondents that were working some form of hybrid, and 49 of those were 100% remote. When the survey was taken, those numbers switched. On-site, we had about 157 employees, and that's really important to remember that some employees never left the campus. We had about 180 that were working hybrid, and then 982 that were 100% remote. So again, this survey was back in June. Some of those numbers may have changed a little bit, but again, just wanted to give you some of those statistics. And if you're curious to see how your organization responded as far as response rate, this slide here lists all of the organizations and divisions and what their response rate was per their unit or per their organization. This next slide here are just really some key findings to the survey. For those employees that took the survey and were asked whether they preferred to work some form of remote or hybrid versus being on site, 93% preferred remote or hybrid work options. For the supervisors and managers that took the survey, 74% feel that their teams could be successful in that type of model, and 89% felt that their teams have been performing at the same or improved level. As far as support and resource needs, when they were asked the questions, and you may remember this question if you took the survey, is what current challenges are you facing at the moment? And while 50% of the respondents said that there weren't any current challenges that they were experiencing, there's still some employees that were experiencing some challenges. And again, a lot of that had to do with childcare. Some employees felt that they were that they were socially isolated and they didn't feel comfortable working from home. They also felt that communication was a bit of a challenge. They had to learn how to best communicate with their employees or their coworkers, I should say, now that mostly everyone was working remotely or in some hybrid fashion. And also their physical workspace. A lot of employees, as you're probably one of them, that was asked to all of a sudden work from their office and actually go into another environment, which is mainly their home. There was a lot going on during that time. So a lot of employees felt that they did not have the proper workspace at that time. And if you were like me, it didn't take that long to adjust. But for some employees that had never worked from home, it actually took a while for them to adjust to their home workspace. And as far as needing anything to do their job well, working remotely, 74% that felt that they had what they needed after some settling in. And their supervisors and managers were really helpful in providing them what they needed to work remotely. And 54% felt that they did not need additional resources or support. And that could range from anything from having office supplies, et cetera. So that number, while it seems high, there were still employees that felt that they needed to have some additional technology. And as Jeff mentioned, that's going to be addressed in a little bit on this particular slide presentation. And as far as returning to campus, 31%, so about a third of the employees that took the survey felt safe returning to campus. Primarily, they felt safe, according to their comments, because they had already been vaccinated or knew that their coworkers had been vaccinated. They also felt safe because they felt that there were appropriate safety protocols in place. But again, there is that other percent, 69%, that did not feel safe. And part of that had to do with they wanted to make sure that there were social and physical distancing practices that were going to be put in place. And they were also concerned, 11% were concerned about vaccination of our campus community. So there was a lot more to this survey, and you'll have an opportunity to look at the survey if you haven't already. You can see all of the individual questions broken down, and you can see some of the responses, but these were some of the key findings that we wanted to highlight. In addition to key findings, we also have recurring themes in some of the survey responses. And those areas here have to do with communication and collaboration tools, trust, that their leadership trusts remote workers, whether or not they feel safe returning to work, and parking, and how are those parking fees possibly going to be adjusted, and then dual workstations. So I've asked Gerry to just take over from this part of the presentation and hopefully address some of these items that have come up.
Yeah, thanks, Lorena. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. This is, I think, our third town hall kind of talking about return to campus and broadly those issues, and certainly happy to address any other questions we have. Might mention that while we focused here mostly on individuals who, and many questions and comments from individuals who've been hybrid or mostly remote, we always remember that there's a lot of our staff that never left campus, and faculty too. And so there have been a lot that have left, and that's what we're trying to figure out, how to safely and reasonably return, given that we expect 26,000 students to be here for the fall quarter. I see there were some questions in there about the dual workstations and the like. Jeff talked about the $1 million that has been distributed. I might mention, and there was a question about some of the previous expenditures that had been made to move to remote, and the financial planning and analysis staff have asked all the departments to track expenses like that since COVID started. And for those departments that tracked those and submitted those, there was about $500,000 worth of expenditures that had already been made to help people move to remote or hybrid. And those are in the process of being reimbursed. So those departments that did make those expenses, that did submit those expenses as part of the regular monthly tracking of COVID-related expenditures, they will have those expenses reimbursed there. There was another question about, just to clarify, this was all staff. So regardless of represented, non-represented, all staff received the opportunity to respond to this survey. You know, I think there were some things in this survey that certainly were very helpful, at least from my perspective. There were some things that were expected, but the things that to me that I have learned to date from COVID is it's hard to predict the future, and we all need to be flexible and ready to make some adjustments as we learn more information. I'll give you just an insight from myself, and you may have different perspectives, but let's say 9 weeks ago, I had a different, I can tell you, I had a different outlook for the future, the near future and the start of fall. It seemed like things were looking pretty good. The infections were very low. Certainly the tracking of information in Riverside County and on campus, we hadn't seen reports of any viruses or anything like that for some time. Certainly this Delta variant has changed things dramatically. I expect in 8 or 9 weeks, things will be different. I hope they're a lot better, but we have to be vigilant in tracking this information and making adjustments as we go along. And so many of you know, at the end of July, I guess, the campus required everyone to be wearing masks inside any buildings, unless you're like me right now in my own office with the doors closed. And so that was a change because of COVID and changes in the infection levels there. Communication, I think there were a lot of pieces of information there, especially that so many of the overwhelming majority indicated that they would rather get their information from email. And so we've passed that on to communication because a lot of what they had been sharing is in sort of some of the electronic newsletters and the like, but really trying to focus more on being responsive to this survey and getting information out in digestible chunks via email so we can try to address those needs. Trust in leadership and support. I think those are ongoing issues that we all have to work together collaboratively on. Certainly what we've desired and what we've indicated is that each position that is on campus, each staff position, has different duties and responsibilities. It's possible you have the same job classification as somebody else somewhere on campus, but your daily duties and activities may be different in many different ways there. And so that discussion between you and your supervisor and the chain of command of supervisors is very, very important. So we've stressed with the deans and the vice chancellors that they need to engage in their units to help assure there's some level of consistency being applied to all staff. And again, it's relative consistency. I'll give you the example in my division. I have people in the central plant that have to be there in order for the campus steam and chilled water and everything else, electrical service to work. So they're there 24/7. That's inconsistent with some other programs on campus like institutional research, who have worked mostly remotely. So I can't make it consistent for every staff person, but within the context of what their responsibilities are, that's certainly one of my goals. And I think what we've highlighted to staff is that if you think somehow that your supervisor is not being as reasonable as you would hope, I think you have some options. You can work up the chain of command in the organization. Sometimes that's fraught with issues and concerns. You can contact your HR person within your division to talk about that, and hopefully they will anonymously give that feedback to the organizational level leadership to look at these issues to try to bring about some reasonable consistency. I'm not sure we can meet everybody's needs. Likely we won't be able to, but certainly our goal is to be as fair as we can across the campus, given the duties and responsibilities of everyone. Safety upon return, that's been something we've tried to deal with from the beginning of COVID, making adjustments, moving to all online. Now, some of that was because Riverside Public Health told us we had to do that, but we've been cautious in coming back to campus. We've are certainly in the throes now of implementing the UC vaccine policy. We're going with masking indoors. Today's the vaccine mandate implementation date, August 16th. And again, we're going to be very careful in tracking where the virus is going and trying to adjust as necessary to keep people as safe as possible. There's a lot of material on the website about questions that people bring up about ventilation in buildings. Facilities has done a good job there and provided a lot of information there. Certainly the top recommendation of anybody in public health and for the campus is get vaccinated. That seems to be everyone's best hope of staying safe. If there's reasons why you don't feel you can get vaccinated, there are options for exceptions that you can process those exceptions. You will be asked to be tested, asymptomatic testing on some regular basis, and you will likely have to wear protective equipment, mask, and the like more often than a vaccinated person. Parking and parking fees adjustments. Parking has made some adjustments. Go to their website. You'll see they have a new pass of a 10 parking day pass out there for those that it might work more for them. They've basically said if you have been given a parking lot, you'll be able to keep that regardless of your work status this fall through January, essentially. And January only because we're looking at fall as a transition period. It's not normal. It won't be normal, but hopefully we can get to a normal after this fall, and then we'll certainly keep assessing all those issues there. I mentioned the dual workstations and the like. So I thought there was some information from this survey that I think we did expect. There's some that was not, and that was very helpful. And so I appreciate everybody who participated in that survey, and it has brought value to us. I thought, let me commend Lorena for doing such a great job in putting that together. I know she had some other help, but she's really the main person who basically put this survey together, implemented it, and then put together the response information that you have here and that you can access online. I know there's a lot of questions out there, and so Jeff, maybe we can get to the Q&A at this point in time. John, Stephen, and I'll sort of do quarterbacking on some of the questions. If we don't know the answer or we want to make someone else answer it, and I'm just kidding on that. If we don't know the answer, we'll ask somebody else on the team that we think has the best information about it, but we'll do our best to try to respond to those questions. Again, within the context that there is a lot of information online already, and we're trying to make sure that we not only communicate this information, but try to address it in the specificity that's in some people's minds, because your job at the university may have some unique features and constraints that are important for us to consider, and we may or may not have already been able to address those in the questions that we've responded to already. So with that, where do we want to go on Q&A? I think you had some maybe that had come in beforehand that you wanted us to address.
Yes. So thank you so much to Jeff, Lorena, John Stevens, and BC Bomotti for your information. So we will now start answering questions submitted both by the audience and pre-submitted questions. So please remember to use the Q&A function to upvote questions. And then if we have questions that seem to be similar, we will combine them, and then we will send out the information that's been vetted by the experts in that department sometime this month. So I will start with the first question, which you kind of touched on, BC Bomotti. So there are already semester schools who started the year on campus and have reversed and gone back to remote as the new variant is taking hold. Has there been any thought about the possibility of this situation and how the campus will respond?
Sure, let me respond to that. First of all, Loretta, I have a favor to ask of you. Call me Gerry. That would be great. That'll work just fine. So okay. Certainly we're tracking one of our sister institutions, Berkeley, and certainly another one, Merced. Both of them are on their semester system. They might start this week or next. I forget exactly, but they're right in the queue to get started. So we're, as we did last year, we're watching that very, very carefully. like we've done through this whole pandemic. And as it started in March of 2020, I was sitting here in my office. It was 4:15 in the afternoon on a Friday. I think it was March 13th. And somebody came in and said the Riverside Public Health just said everyone had to go home. And so external units like that, the public health officials, the state, even CDC can basically direct us to take action if in fact that's necessary and important. And so we have to be mindful of that. We don't necessarily control our own direction in that regard. And again, all of that will be because of things like the infection in the community. Certainly another thing that started in many places last week, K-12 system. We're tracking that. If the K-12 system is shut down and goes remote, I think that sends a big message for everybody else, and we'll have to track that carefully. Hopefully that does not happen. All of our planning right now is for being able to get back to a more normal, it won't be exactly normal, operation this fall, because we think that's important for us to do. Balanced against the fact that we need to be safe. Now, part of what we're looking at as being safe is we're trying to track what the vaccination rates for our employees and students are. And so we're still getting some of that information in, but we're hopeful we can be above 80% for our employees. I'm hopeful we'll be above 90% for our students. And so that can help to some extent, but the answer to the question is anything's possible. As I gave the example, 9 weeks ago, I foolishly thought, well, gee, things look pretty good for the fall. And it turned around. I'm hoping it turns around the other way, but we'll all have to be conscious of and move forward with due deliberance in order to keep everyone safe.
Yeah, let me just add a little bit to that. And it's interesting because I think agility and flexibility is one of those things that everybody's going to have to pay attention to. And when I say everyone, I mean from, the vice chancellors, the chancellor, the deans, and all of the staff overall. I think one of the things, I don't know if a lot of people realize this, that, I'm in a dual appointment right now. My other appointment is actually at Berkeley, who's already actually been back, and we're already actively on campus, those types of things. And, in the last few weeks, we've had a lot of changes where the city of Berkeley actually required a mask mandate. Then the county actually changed our mask mandate for us. And one of those things as a leadership team at Berkeley, we've had to realize, hey, we're going to have to change and adjust on the fly, in the best interest of public health and everything else. And I think that's exactly what we're going to do. And every county is different. So it's not even going to be necessarily there. Every single UC is going to actually be in the same sequence with masking or not and everything. And that's something that we're all going to have to keep in mind. Just this past Thursday, the city of San Francisco changed in their entire guidance around indoor events and masking. So UCSF has had to change. So I imagine that we're going to have those exact same kinds of things happen here at Riverside, where we're going to have to be, A, keeping track of what's going on, B, staying very well, in the loop of the county and the state and what's actually happening. And then, and how do we communicate that back to all of our faculty and staff, and how do we make those changes? And I think, one of those things, agility is going to be very important for us. And it's something else I want to make sure people realize is that, something that we say today could literally change tomorrow or the next day. And it's not that we were necessarily wrong. It's just because things have changed. And, and that's one of those things I just keep on trying to let people know is we're always going to do what's in the best interest for UCR and actually being able to move forward. And if that means we have to change direction, that's what we're going to be willing to do.
Thank you, John, Stephen, and Gerry. One of the other questions we got that was submitted ahead of time was, given that the results of the staff flexible work survey are just now being available to staff, were these results taken into consideration when making a fall return decision?
So let me try to address that. The fall return decision was probably, I don't know exactly when, but it was many months ago. And so I think the intent for all the UCs was to return in the fall if possible. Many of the issues that we've learned about since that time and learned about through the survey, I think have helped inform us about how to make that transition. And so I think to the credit of Staff Assembly, they saw that same information, similar information, and heard it from staff that I had seen in some cases, and that is, well, some departments need help with providing equipment and other support materials for employees to be able to work on a hybrid basis or remotely, especially hybrid if they're both coming to campus some days and staying home the others. And so, that led and has led to some allocation of funds. And so I think the intent of the kind of having the offices open on campus effective September 1st was also mitigated with basically the caution that we don't think it makes sense for everybody to be staffed like you were before COVID. And I think what most of us, and certainly I've talked to my staff about is, as we open up in September for the fall, let's err on the side of caution and find out. We may have to adjust things. We may have 2 people in an office. Normally there's 10. You don't want all 10 back. We want to keep the density low, but we'll have to assess. Will our students need that in that office presence, or our faculty need that? Have they gotten used to more of the remote options to basically get some of their issues addressed and the like? So I think it certainly reinforced that we need to be flexible, and we need to basically kind of learn every day as we get into the fall to make adjustments. And again, the way we start the fall off may be different than where we are in the middle or the end of the fall. I mentioned communications that, boy, it sure hit me that survey said for most people, I want to get an email. And so I think what we've tried to figure out, how do we do that in an effective manner? How do we get that email out and make it so that it's easy to read and understand? And that if people want more information off the key topic we're trying to share with them, they have links they can go and look at that. I think certainly it's reinforced to me what I mentioned before, and that is we need to give our staff some assistance with their chain of command of supervisors. And I think we have good staff and good supervisors. But in order to bring about some consistency, that's where we've talked to the deans and the vice chancellors and others about our roles to try to assure there's some consistency within those units, and that individuals have an opportunity to work up the chain of command, either directly or through their HR contact, to have some review of what the decision was about their particular remote or hybrid or campus work environment might be. And so, those are, in my opinion, more difficult issues to have a formula to address, because again, it depends upon the duties and responsibilities of those particular individuals there. So certainly that whole section about providing some support to help the supervisors in an org and the unit carefully review the needs of the individuals. And again, I've highlighted as well, the needs of the university are important and critical, but there's also to be balanced against the needs of the individual employees. I mean, some of our employees certainly I know are very concerned. They have young children at home. They may have other family members at home, young children that aren't eligible for vaccination. There's a whole host of issues and concerns they may have there. And I think that has to be part of the balance in the equation of figuring out what's reasonable for this employee relative to campus or hybrid or remote work, but also what's fair to some of the other colleagues they have in there. And so, that's a difficult balance, I would argue, for any supervisor. So we think it makes sense to have minds from some of the other supervisors and leadership in that unit to help out and make sure, to the best of our ability, we're making some of the right choices there. Certainly, I think it was before the survey, but people had commented about parking and everything. So we worked with TAPS and tried to say, okay, it makes good sense. People be coming back remotely. Big issue people had highlighted about is, well, what if I, worked years to get into parking lot number, whatever, am I going to lose my option there? So again, we brought that out to January and we'll reassess it at that point in time, depending upon where we are in the pandemic. So I think we learned quite a bit from that. As I said, some of the things were what we expected because we'd had input before, but some were things that help us be more specific in our response. And I'd say we're having a town hall here, and that's going to help us be even more specific in response to some of the needs of supporting staff on campus.
Okay, so I think this question will kind of touch more on the specificity of our managers. So this question is, how does the campus plan to handle departments where management has personal preference to minimize work from home flexibility, even though the nature of staff's work can be conducted remotely? Some management, for whatever reason, are adamant to drag staff back to have people in the office, not out of need, but out of preference.
That's an important question. It's a difficult one for me to be able to respond to specifically because, again, the issues are down to the duties and responsibilities of a particular individual. And so, as an example, I know that I've received some information from some units, and the head of that unit did express a preference that it's easier for them to work with staff if they're all in the office. They can walk down the hall and talk to them. And I've talked to them about, well, you could call them, you could Zoom with them, you could do other things as well. So there's some preference there, but which is not insignificant, but more than that is what we've tried to highlight. It has to be more than that, that it would just be, in one person's opinion, preferable for that. Maybe it's a hybrid. Maybe they don't have to come in every day. Maybe if people know, well, that person's going to be here 3 days a week. And so, if I can call them on the other 2 days. And so I've tried to highlight that with the deans and the vice chancellors, because that's issues come up before, and try to make sure they understood that, this is something important to many staff. And it's something that hopefully you can address in your unit for those individuals that have a personal preference that may or may not be a institutional requirement. So we kind of have to separate those things. I joke that I work with Millie here in my office, and she's worked remotely, and so normally I'd go out and be able to talk to her. She'd counsel me on various things pre-COVID, and that was very helpful to me. So I miss that, and I probably didn't call her as often as I would see her when she was in the office. But you adjust for those things, and certainly. Is it nicer if she comes back in the office? Well, yeah, but it's what's more safe? More safe if she works hybrid. And so those are the type of things we need to still look at, because COVID, unfortunately, is not in the rear view mirror. I wish it was. It's not in the rear view mirror. And so we're going to have to get through this to the extent that it is in the rear view mirror. And then and only then, in my opinion, can we start talking about things of what's a post-COVID normal. And I do think there's a lot of opportunities for some hybrid. I think that does make a lot of sense to me. But those issues have come up a lot that you mentioned in your question there. And those were ones that helped us focus comments to the deans and the vice chancellors about particular areas for their units that we certainly needed their help on.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that when you look at that survey results, I think it was almost 80% of supervisors also believe that hybrid and and remote schedules make a lot of sense. And I think it was about 90% of them that said it's been working out very well for the last year and a half, or however long it's been too. So the very large majority of our supervisors and managers support it completely. And I think one of the things that we found is that, there's always going to be those few that may, using the wording of the question, I think of us as have a preference that people are in. And I think that, working through the leadership, in terms of that supervisor's manager or the dean or the vice chancellor, we're able to counsel on a lot of those to actually get more leniency and flexibility, because that's really what we're pushing. I think there's also a couple of courses, and we've realized that some supervisors, I don't think necessarily feel comfortable about how are they going to get everything done in this new environment. And Leela and her team have put together a couple, Leela Dennis, who I think is on the call now, has put together some resources for actually supervisors to actually help them better manage and figure out how to actually go a longer term working with remote and hybrid teams, because that's one of those things are like areas of support we realize that we need. So, so there is a generally great agreement. We're getting very few, and I don't know if we've gotten really any managers that are just so adamant of saying no, as much as, sometimes we have to massage those conversations a little bit to actually gain some of the flexibility that we're really looking for, specifically in the short term, and hopefully we'll figure out what to do in longer term as well.
Yeah, good points. The other thing I'd mention that certainly I brought up in my discussion with people is that, post-COVID, we could be in a very different environment. I've seen some signs of this already with not only retention, not only recruitment, but retention of staff. And so I think a lot more you're seeing staff who see advantages for some at least hybrid option. And I think we need to be conscious that that's a recruitment and retention issue too. And so we as individuals who are hiring talent out there need to be looking at that and thinking about that, so that if we can offer a remote option, then we need to look at that, or a hybrid option at least. We need to look at that in order to be able to be competitive in many ways. Now, again, the dust hasn't settled on post-COVID employment, but certainly it does look like things are moving strongly in that direction. John Stephen, I think, already told me that some departments at Berkeley, or at least one, has already kind of said, well, we're going to go hybrid, basically, except for some unique exceptions there. And so I think we'll see more and more of that. So to be competitive, I think we have to look at it from that very self-serving perspective as well.
Thank you, Gerry and John Stephen. So with talking about hybrid, with September 1st being around the corner, there seems to be some mixed messages about the expectations of a hybrid schedule. Will clarification be given, considering we are supposed to be getting 30-day notice ahead of any changes?
You're right, that 30 days, I think, goes back to maybe June or earlier when the chancellor sent out a note, might have been in June or even late May, to ask everyone to start these discussions so that by the time it got to July, they could have some ideas of what work schedules would be. So hopefully most units, I think for those that I'm aware of, they have had those discussions. People have been aware for some time. And they're kind of ready to move forward. There's some adjustments in there because some people have particular issues in the first half of September, and so there's some modest adjustments in there. But if individuals have not had an agreement and worked out something with their supervisors, I would suggest they talk to their HR department, HR professional there, to kind of seek some guidance there. That would be unusual, I would think, but it's certainly possible. And again, the chancellor's certainly request was that people are given at least 30 days so that they know how to make their adjustment there. And so, as I said, for any of the units I'm familiar with, people have known for quite some time now about what September is going to starting September is going to look like there. But if some staff do not know, I would suggest certainly you can talk to the supervisor, they can talk to their HR contact in the department as well, and try to get some relief on that, and make sure that that can be addressed, because it's getting late for people, very late for people not to have already had that worked out with their supervisor. And again, let me also mention what I've mentioned before, and I bring this up all the time. These are discussions we have about our projections for starting out fall quarter. I put the big caveat that we have to continue to look at this because within a few weeks, we may have to make some adjustments for all sorts of reasons, some of which we don't even know yet. It'll be information that'll come to us and changing environment and changing situation. And so these were intended to be where we start the fall, but I would expect that in many cases there will be the need for additional adjustments as we move forward.
Thank you. So speaking of fall return, are there any plans of what to do when a student tests positive? Because students move from class to class, will those classes all have to be shut down?
Sure, good question, and one we're working on right now. So again, another thing that's changed over time with COVID is kind of the CDC requirements for locking space down. It was a period of, I think, at least 7 days. It could have been longer depending upon how long someone had been in it. The current CDC guidelines, and again, the CDC, like all of us learning, they learned too, and they found out that COVID is more of an aerosol transmission. It's not really on hard surfaces. I guess you could get it maybe, but it's really aerosol transmission. And so it's not what's on surfaces necessarily. And so what they moved from was this 7-day or whatever to what their current standard is. And I'll tell you what it is. It's that whether it's a classroom, whether it's a lab, whether it's an office, whatever, if someone tests positive for COVID and we're aware of that and that they were in a space within 24 hours of knowing that they tested positive, we are required to shut that space down and disinfect it. That's the current standard. Now, it's perhaps hard to figure out if you could meet that 24-hour requirement, because now you get tested and then you say, I was in this space. Sometimes it's been a lot longer than that. If it's between 24 hours and 3 days, the CDC requirement is that you have to shut the space down and you have to just do regular cleaning. It's over 3 days though, there's basically CDC goes, well, there's really nothing you can do. So you just move on. And so what we're working with certainly an instructional continuity team on for sure, because we're concerned about the classroom. So if something happens in a classroom and we're aware within 24 hours that someone who tested positive had been in that classroom, we are going to have some temporary shutdown of that classroom. And so we have to communicate with the faculty about what they need to do for those classes that are going to be disrupted. For if it's between 24 hours and 3 days, we just have regular cleaning. That'll go quicker, but it'll still have some impact on the classes that were scheduled. And if it's more than 3 days, it won't have any disruption. So I expect there'll be instances of that happening in the fall. And so we'll just have to deal with them as we can. And in that case, some students will miss a class. Maybe their faculty will say, okay, we'll do something remotely, or here's how we'll address that missed class because the classroom was shut down. Maybe they'll have the entire class remote in that instance, but that's something we'll have to be prepared to respond to, because there will be instances of that we will have to deal with.
Thank you, Gerry. Since today is the deadline to submit proof of vaccination, one of the questions we're getting is, I saw on the campus return that 68% of employees and 54% of students are vaccinated. As I understand, the unvaccinated have 3 disciplinary or corrective actions that they were given a chance to submit it. If that doesn't happen, are you able to share with us what those corrective actions might be?
Let me do 2 things. Let me make a couple comments. I'm going to ask Linda Roney to give a couple comments, and then I'll ask John Stephen or somebody on his team to address the discipline piece there. So first of all, that the data that you're talking about there is as of sometime last week. And so today was the deadline. I understand a lot of people have submitted stuff, so it's sort of in the works to being updated. So we do expect those numbers to change. On the student side, different maybe than the staff side, employee side, it does appear, this is just my opinion, that our students are more relaxed about when they submit their material prior to the fall quarter. And so we're getting that feedback from Housing did a survey of students coming into housing. And it was a pretty good response on that survey. And they basically had about 90% of the students that said they were vaccinated at that time, 8% saying that they expected to be fully vaccinated by the middle of September, and 2% that said they anticipated seeking one of the exemptions. So I do think that probably the student numbers are lagging, although I think the students got a big group of responses in this last week as well. So it's still early for me to understand where those numbers will top off at. And I'm going to ask Linda Roney if she may comment a little bit on that, because she knows the details about that, and correct anything I said that may have been wrong. And then I'd ask John Stephen to maybe speak a little bit to the notification then. So when the dust settles, and it's not going to be today because they have to load all this stuff up, when the dust settles and we know who has not complied with the vaccine mandate, then what steps will HR take under the guidance of the UC policy? So Linda, would you comment a little bit on the numbers?
Of course, and you are correct. The numbers were last updated last week for the proof of vaccination percentages. We update them weekly. We'll probably work with campus communications to have them updated a couple of times this week, just because we know that people will be looking more frequently to see what's going on. Historically, we have learned that when any policy comes out or when there's any deadline, you get a group of people that answer and submit whatever they need to the first couple of weeks. And then you get a group of people, a few in the middle, but then you get another rush at the end of, when that compliance deadline is coming to an end. And so we're seeing the same pattern with this. We came in this morning and I believe there were approximately 2,000 proof of submissions from the students. And then we had about 500 proof of submissions that came in for the employees. So we anticipate that those numbers are going to keep going up. We also keep seeing more submissions come in throughout the day. And we'll have a few stragglers who will probably come in, tomorrow or Wednesday. So like I said, we'll go ahead and make sure that we work with campus communications to have the numbers updated more frequently so everybody can stay in the loop. And I did post the link in the Q&A session. Somebody else had asked where they're reported at. So on the campus return webpage, so that everybody will be aware of our status.
But okay, and then John Stephen, do you want to talk a little bit about when we figure the dust is settled on what came in and that we updated everything? What are the UC requirements for compliance?
Sure, I'll start off, then I'll ask George to speak, who's our Director of Employee and Labor Relations. But one thing I wanted to say, like Linda just said, a lot of people are starting to actually go ahead and post their information right now or ask for one of the exemption exceptions. With those exemptions, and there's probably people in the call right now that are aware that we're using Sedgwick, an outside vendor to actually help us manage through the exception process. And because of some delays, actually largely with the Office of the President, not necessarily due to Sedgwick, they've been delayed on being able to actually start their processing and responding to employees. I want to be very clear that we know we have a few hundred, I'm not sure what the right number is right now, people who have actually asked for exceptions that have not been actually notified yet because of some delays actually with OP, but hopefully those will be rectified by this week, end of next week. And if people are actually in that process, and if they're in any kind of in-process statement, they'll be actually fine in terms of, quote unquote, being in violation of the policy currently right now. On Thursday, I believe, we'll be sending out notifications to employees who we don't actually have proof of vaccination for. And that will be the first notification. We're sure that some of those people are going to be responding with, hey, but I did upload, and we'll have to go back and actually verify, oh, they really did upload, or something's happening with Sedgwick. But there's a process for that. And one of the things I can say is at Berkeley, they've already gone through this first step of actually employee notifications. And you'd be surprised at the number of people that all of a sudden are actually uploading really quick after they get their first notification that they hadn't done it and they're out of compliance with policy. So our numbers are actually improving a lot. So I don't see this as being a really, really, significant issue for us. But in terms of the process too, and I want to be clear about this, in terms of what happens if somebody just doesn't comply, ever, quote unquote, ever. We're working very closely with Office of the President to actually figure out a UC approach. One of the things that's been talked about is, should each campus kind of decide on their own about what they want to do and how they want to handle it? And the strong sentiment is, you know what, this is COVID-19. This is a public health issue for all of our faculty, our staff, and our students. And we need to be very consistent about our approach overall. So Office of the President has really been taking lead on trying to develop a consistent set of guidelines and a process that we're all going to use. So it doesn't make a difference if you're at Riverside or Berkeley or LA or A&R, we're going to actually go through, as similar to the same process as, as we can. I don't know if that's been finalized 100% yet. So I'm actually going to turn it over to George to go through some of those details or any more information you may be able to share. George?
Yes, I'll just add just a few additional items. I think John Stevens spoke to that initial notice of noncompliance. So once it's determined who's not either in the process for an exemption or, who has not uploaded their information, those individuals, once it's determined who that bucket of people is, those individuals will receive that first notice of non-compliance that John Stevens mentioned. Shortly after that, there's another shorter period to comply, 3 days to either get in the process or upload your information. Then a second notification of non-compliance is provided in the guidelines. At that point, the employee has another period of time, I believe 14 days, to either start the process of vaccination, upload their information, or seek an exemption. And at that point, they will receive the final notice of noncompliance, and then we'll move into that corrective action piece that John Stevens mentioned. There have been no other developments that I'm aware of as of 1:01 p.m. today. It's pretty fluid regarding the consistent guidance from OP on exactly what that corrective action will look like. Currently, the guidelines speak to it generally, and that, of course, policy covered individuals would be subject to disciplinary action in accordance with policy. And of course, for represented employees would be subject to disciplinary action in accordance with collective bargaining agreements.
Okay. And I don't know if one of you can respond to this, but I know with prior, going back a few weeks, there was information coming out. It could have been from Linda Roney's group, I don't know, that was giving information to HR partners and supervisors about which of their employees were cleared to come to campus, essentially. But will there be communications to the supervisors about who is not in compliance with the vaccine mandate, or is that something that would just go to the individual employee themselves?
We go to the, I'm sorry, go ahead, Justin.
No, go on. This is your show.
No.
Go ahead, George.
It would be to both the supervisor and to the HR professional for that department would also receive that notice.
Okay, because if they're not in compliance, at some point you're going to have to tell them they can't come to campus, or they have to wear masks or whatever. So it sounds like the employee and the supervisor will be alerted to that non-compliance, or at least our records showing non-compliance.
Right. The supervisors will be made aware every step of the way, as well as the HR partners. Part of the rationale for the process that George kind of outlined being so long is trying to give people every opportunity in the world and then some to actually come into compliance with the policy. So the entire time, the employee will know, the supervisor will know, as well as the HR partners will know. We'll probably be working with the vice chancellors and deans to make sure that they're aware as well as we go through all of the steps. You know, and again, I think part of the reason why we're trying to take a very deliberate, slow process is to give people the opportunity to, you know, either come into compliance or get an, you know, exception so that we can work with each other as efficiently as we can for that.
Thank you all. The next question is, if an employee is fully vaccinated and contracts COVID in the office, would this be considered a workers' compensation case? If so, is the campus prepared for the outcome with employees returning to the office? Coming in hot.
So I'm trying to think who probably, I don't know if we have anybody from Risk on there, but certainly if they're sick, they come under their, they come under, you know, sick leave and everything like that. I believe, but I hope someone from Risk is on, that the state indicated some time ago that workers' comp was applicable for a situation of COVID, but someone's from Nina.
I think
can you-
Sheila's on the phone, right? Yeah, Sheila's on the phone.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'll take a first stab at it. And I do know that Nini is on the call. She is our risk management lead who supports workers' comp. In a nutshell, COVID infections would be considered like any other workplace injury. You would file a claim. The claim would be processed and investigated through Sedgwick, our third-party administrator. And if deemed appropriate, then would fall under workers' compensation program. As of this date, we have had a few cases on campus, but none of them have actually been determined to be a work-related injury. So most of our cases, I would say 99.9% of our cases have been determined to be community spread. And this most likely will continue because of the preventive measures we've put into place on campus.
I don't know if Nina can respond or not, or if we can, or she needs to, Sheila.
Yes, there a way to make Nini a panelist? I know she's not on the panel right now.
We can, if
Maybe
she
she-
does that, we can ask her to, if she wouldn't mind, to write a response in there, and we can pick it up then on the write-up of the questions and answers.
Yeah, and if worst comes to worst, we'll just do it after this whole setting. So let's just kind of move on for now and let's keep on going, Loretta.
Thank you. So one of the other questions that keeps coming up, Gerry and John Stephen, is, you know, we've talked a fair amount about hybrid, but is a fully remote option possible for employees? If that's something that you can comment on, that would be helpful.
So I'm not sure what the context would be. You know, if that means if the infection comes so bad that the public health closes us down again, then yeah, we would be fully remote then for many people. I think the answer to that, though, as I mentioned before, that to me, there's no formula on it. It's what we need to talk about, what needs to be discussed between the employee and the supervisor. There could be reasons why in a particular set of circumstances, a person working fully remotely makes sense. There may be reasons why it doesn't, and that someone would need to consider some hybrid or back to campus option. As I mentioned, we're trying to be kind of fair and reasonable to everybody. And again, we've had so many people that have never left campus essentially because of their duties and responsibilities. And so I think I'd just say you have to go back to discussions between the employee and the supervisor. The campus has not said that a fully remote option for a particular person can't be considered. We haven't said that at all. What we said was that we want the supervisors and the employees to talk about how can we serve what we expect to have as 26,000 students coming back to campus, our faculty back on campus. How can we serve their needs in the best way possible, given we're still not past this pandemic. It is possible in some cases that somebody would be fully remote. There's some particular exception areas I know that have come up. For example, under the vaccine mandate, there's not an exception, but there's a deferral, I think it's called, or excuse me, it got changed. Another example of things that got changed. So there was a deferral option for someone who was pregnant. I think the CDC changed that last week and said it's no longer the case because now they're recommending individuals who are pregnant get vaccinated. But that would have been an example last week where someone may have said, boy, it might make sense for you if your job duties matched up with working remotely for some option like that. Now with the new CDC guidance, and again, example of things changing fast, then we'll have to take another look at it and see what the options are. But the campus has not dictated and sent out a directive that no person can end up working fully remotely. We've really wanted the individual employees and the supervisors in that chain of command to try to serve the institution the best, and balancing against keeping our employees and our campus community safe.
Yeah, I have to again, say again, it gets back to flexibility and making these kind of decisions in a thoughtful way between supervisors and employees where even before, COVID-19, we had people that were working 100% remote. Since COVID, a lot of people have been working 100% remote and we're aware of that. But part of the questions come down to things like, what does 100% remote really mean? I know, I believe IT right now has been saying that they'll be 100% remote, or a large portion of them will be. But that also means for them that, hey, if something happens to, certain systems or whatever, they may be called at any time to come back to campus. So is that really 100% remote, or is it really kind of a hybrid schedule where they may have to come, even if it's once a month, twice a month to campus? They may be able to actually run their operation that way. I can tell you, things are changing a lot. And at Berkeley right now is a good example where we know that certain units had been 100% remote for the last year and a half. But when you bring students back to campus, things change. So what was happening remote before may or may not be appropriate to serve them going forward, where, we've had students say, hey, I want to meet with a person direct in person for my academic advising, for example, where before all of our academic advisors may have been remote, but now we're actually finding the students that are back, they want to meet with somebody in person. So therefore, maybe it doesn't make sense to be completely remote anymore. So it's about the flexibility and making sure that we're able to serve our students the best way possible. I mean, we have animal care, child care, those types of things to consider. So I think Gerry's right in terms of, we can't make any blanket statements for entire groups and trying to be, fair and equitable to people that are actually in similar roles. But I think we'll have to cross those bridges as we come to them. And also the competitive nature of it too. We're seeing that, different campuses have lost people because, hey, they could be 100% remote if they work someplace else. So why would they want to risk going into the office when they can be 100% someplace else? So if we're losing people like that, or we're gaining people like that, then we have to be competitive to address that as well. So, I think there's going to be a lot more questions to come on there and a lot more flexibility that we're still encouraging through supervisors.
Thank you so much for that. The next question is, will money allocated for remote work furnishings cover expenses employees incurred prior to this program?
Devil's in the details on that. As I maybe mentioned at the beginning, if departments had expenditures in those areas going back to the start of COVID, financial planning analysis had asked people to track those expenses and submit them on a regular basis so we could look at reimbursing them. And so up to the point where we allocated the $1 million recently, there was about $500,000 worth of expenses that were in the process of reimbursing. So the departments would get those funds back. We allocated this $1 million, and so it's restricted to go to supporting hybrid and remote work environments. But if someone missed submitting that as an expense before, but it really was one of their expenses, then they could use this new allocation for it. So I think either way, it could have been something that we're reimbursing for that was a previous expense, or it's something they'll get some revenue for now. Now, I have to admit, and I think Jeff can reinforce this, it was hard for us to estimate what the needs might be. And so we knew that there was about $500,000 of expenses between March and of 2020 and essentially June of 2021. And so we kind of just estimated, well, what $1 million, that should at least help a lot. And we know that many departments had received, had some other savings in travel, a host of other areas. They also had budget cuts too. But we also have given them some other HEERF relief funding in the short term. So we're hopeful that between this dedicated 1 million and some other resources that each department could find a way to make themselves whole. And the allocation for the million was basically looking at all of our staff and then getting data from Linda Roney's group, basically to look at how many people were coming in, kind of not working remotely, coming in on a regular basis. So for example, in my area, if I got an allocation per head that included everybody that was in food service, everybody in facilities and the like, that wouldn't be fair because I don't have any expenses associated with them. So we took those folks out so that to the extent we could, we focused on those that were working remotely or hybrid already there. So I think hopefully if people have some questions about a specific situation, certainly they could check with their CFAO. And if that CFAO had questions, they can check with my office or FP&A. But hopefully there's funding there to cover some of those expenses for equipment like that.
Thank you, Gerry. Will there be a place staff can report managers or people who are not following guidelines or not being flexible with work from home guidelines given by the campus? And this can be Gerry or John Stephen or
Sure.
both.
I'll make a couple comments. It's probably more of an HR response there, but I think what HR and the UCOP is asking for remote and hybrid work is filling out this form basically. And HR, I think, has a very good website about remote work. It has a lot of resources in there, including this kind of form that says I'm going to be working remote and what are the requirements, assumptions, and the like. And so, that's, I wouldn't say a contract, but that is really the assumptions that are written down about between the employee and supervisor. And so the expectation is that people will abide by that. And so if there are some concerns, it's likely the first stop might be the supervisor be one, but the other would be the HR contact in the department. But let me ask John Stephen to take a shot at it or turn it over to one of his folks. They probably can answer it better than I am.
Right. I think it really does get back to working through your supervisor and your leadership there. If, and plus specifically your HR partner. So, every unit has an HR partner. If you don't know who your HR partner is, then I would encourage you probably reach directly out to George, who can actually redirect you to who your HR partner is to find that out, because that's really where the decisions are really made about what makes sense in terms of who should or shouldn't be or can or can't really perform on a remote basis. But we do have other sources on our websites that actually help people actually think through that process, so think through who really should or shouldn't. So I'm not sure if George or Leela, do you want to actually add something either, from a practical matter in terms of how do I tactically, work through my leadership for this and what can HR do, or from what's on the website to actually be resources?
George is on mute, but I'll piggyback off of what George says.
No problem. If you want to go first. No, I was thinking and thinking in agreement. I do think, as Gerry mentioned before, that these are very specific to the department and particular role. And so to that extent, those discussions and, concerns with those arrangements, I would see going through the local HR or even through the kind of leadership of the leadership in that particular unit. And, we're of course here to support and employee relations. If individuals, employees, supervisors, or otherwise want to have kind of walk through those concerns and the best way to approach it.
Right. And just to piggyback on that, HR does have a website, and it's titled the Work Life Forms and Documents. So you can go there and you can see where the document is for the alternative or flexible work agreement. Also amongst those documents is a selection criteria for successful telecommuting guidelines. I would suggest you take a look at that and make sure most of those boxes are checked, and those that are not, have that conversation with your supervisor. The goal here is to have the conversation with your supervisor, of course, and see if there's some level of agreement that can be made. Should you feel that that level of agreement is not to your satisfaction, then that's when you would take the appropriate next course of action and reach out to your HR partner and see if there could be some type of dialogue or discussion at that point. But you can really just start there and just begin to have the conversations. With EOD has trainings managing in the modern workplace, as well as managing the people side of change. So we do encourage supervisors and staff all around, non-supervisors, to take those courses and register for them so that you can have a better idea of what that change management cycle looks like, and then really how to have those types of conversations. We don't really have talking tracks for you to say, this is what I should say to my supervisor, because that's, we just can't do that. There would be so many talking tracks because we don't really know the relationship that you have with your supervisor. We can certainly guide you, but at the end of the day, that decision will be up to your supervisor. And what you can do if your supervisor is not in agreement is do your best to influence that and to come to a mutual agreement.
Yeah, I think we should be clear that HR doesn't have the, ability just to kind of wave a magic wand and, make every employee get what they really want, as much as what we're really trying to do is, encourage you all to work through your leadership tracks, because we do realize that there are some supervisors that are resistant or not knowledgeable for one reason or the other. So, one of the things we can do is actually help open their minds quite a bit. And I think we've been pretty successful at it over and large. Again, you look at the survey results, 80% of our supervisors are already there in favor of, hybrid work, hybrid models, or some kind of flexible work remote model. Maybe not always as extreme as what people would like, but I think most of our managers really have been pretty engaged in being as flexible as they can be, because most of our, managers and supervisors themselves want these types of relationships. So, but again, work through your local HR and work through your supervisors, really the best advice we can give you. And when we work with our managers, we actually really just try to get them to actually reframe their thinking a bit. If it's really about their own personal preferences. And I think that's like one of the questions that was earlier, like if their preference is just for you to be in the office versus actually a real business need. And that's where we try to actually help managers distinguish the difference between they need to get past their preferences sometimes and do things differently in actually order to support the health, and safety of their employees, but still meet the business need.
Okay, thank you so much. So I have one last quick question, and then I'll toss it to Agam to give last steps and what happens after this. So the last question will be, will there be a place where staff can report managers or people who are not following guidelines or are not being flexible in terms of work from home?
So was that the question? I thought that was the question we were just sort of responding to.
That was kind of, okay, let me ask this next question.
Okay. Well, it may just be me that I'm having deja vu moment and it's not true.
No, as they're all coming through, it sounds very familiar when you get to the last word.
Okay.
So this will be a non-deja vu question.
Okay.
This survey was done before the Delta variant rampaged through the state and county. Do you feel respondents would think differently about returning to campus regardless if one is vaccinated? That's a new question.
Yeah, I don't. no, probably I would say, as I mentioned, my own experience, 9 weeks ago, I was there in it was kind of June or early July, and I was thinking, well, maybe I can see a path towards opening in the fall and not having a lot of risks, and things look pretty good. And then the Delta variant came around. And so, I'm like everybody trying to see where does that variant, where does this spike end and start going down? And is it leading to more people being vaccinated? I mean, it's not me, but it's the public health people and the epidemiologists and others saying the ticket to solving this pandemic is a highly functional and safe vaccine. And to the extent that we can't reach enough, the majority of everyone with the vaccine, they seem to predict that these type of variants could continue to evolve and continue to cause problems for all of us. So my hope is that there is some there are some changes in those areas, but more directly to the kind of the impetus for that question. I think I'd speak for everybody that I work with here at UCR. We're redoubling our efforts to look at, okay, we're going to start here. Let's take it a day at a time. Let's see what Berkeley's running into. Let's see what K-12 is doing. Boy, we need to take it a day at a time and see what happens. And let's look at what our vaccination rates are. If in our residence halls, which is our most highly dense housing, if our vaccination rates are 98%, boy, I'm going to be thrilled and think, can people still get COVID? Well, sure. But boy, there's a level of protection there that makes me feel really, really good. So certainly I've focused more, and I think other people have, on, boy, this isn't behind us, and boy, there may be something coming after Delta that we have to worry about if we don't get these vaccination rates up higher. And so I expect that there could be some different opinions about that, because when we sent that out, it was at a time, in my opinion, that the outlook was more positive, I think, than right now. But again, as I mentioned, I keep reminding myself, because I often forget, the one consistency for me since COVID started was that any projection I tried to make a few months out or a few weeks out even was useless, because things changed generally on a regular basis. And so being flexible and recognizing that we have to keep monitoring the underlying facts and adjust to it. And that could be, different for different departments, but we need to continue to be focused on that and vigilant that we adjust to any and all different information, different set of circumstances. If CDC or Riverside Public Health give us a directive, we're going to have to assess that. We're going to have to comply. So yes, I think we're still in the situation where it's hard to predict that many weeks out. I'll keep my fingers crossed that 9 weeks from now, things are back to really, really, really good. But I wouldn't put any significant money on it. I don't know. I hope that's the case, but it's hard, at least for me, to predict.
Yeah, when I think about the survey results, and it was like 93% of the people saying they want to continue to have a remote or a hybrid schedule in terms of being at work. I don't think that would change a lot because of the Delta variant, or unless we went from 93% to 100%. But I think it was already very, very tailored towards pushing for remote hybrid schedules already in terms of the data that we got. I think the one number that may have changed a little bit, I think, and I can't remember what it was, I think 31% of the people feeling safe about coming back to the campus. I could see that number really changing because of the Delta variant, going down in terms of maybe people, didn't know at the time of responding to the survey. If they knew then what they know now, would they have actually responded that way? Maybe not for some of them. But I think the reality also is that, I think because of Delta variant somewhat, the UC totally is actually taking a much tougher stance around, actually we were just talking about the policy around what happens if you don't get vaccinated. So that stance is going to be a bit stronger. We're really pushing vaccinations a lot more. And we're going to really be enforcing it a lot more this time around than I think people actually understand or imagine compared to, like, say, flu vaccine. So I think trying to make it as safe as possible. And I think the reality is that, and something that Sheila just said, maybe 10 minutes ago about, the people that have actually contracted COVID that we found on campus has not been campus spread. It's been actually through the community, which is actually kind of telling. But, say that trend changed one way or the other, then we would change along with it. I think already September's reopening of the offices is going to be, I've kind of said it's like opening light, where we're going to actually not have a full steam, if the office has 10 people in it, we're not going to have all 10 of those people back. We may have 2 to actually help with that, and we'll adjust going forward from there. But I think that has Delta changed things for people's minds since the survey? Yeah, I think it's a lot more serious, and now more people are getting vaccines than were getting vaccines before hearing about Delta variant. And I think some of the people that would have felt safe probably wouldn't feel as safe, but I think we're doing things to address it on both the UC wide as well as the campus level to actually help reverse some of that too.
Thank you. As we close out this session, I just want to remind everybody that a recording of this session will be available on Staff Assembly's Facebook page, as well as our upcoming newsletter. We got over 75 or 80 questions. We will share answers to all these questions during presented to us during this town hall, again, in our next upcoming newsletter. One more reminder, we've got a fantastic Wealth Summit organized by Staff Assembly coming up on August 24th. So please, would love to see all of you. And finally, a very special thank you to Gerry Bomotti and John Stephen and all the panelists for joining us and sharing your insights and perspectives. We appreciate your time and your effort to join us. And a special thank you to all the staff out there tuning in and serving the university. Good day and a good afternoon to all of you.
All right. Well, thank
Okay,
you.
thank
all
you.
too, and everyone for joining. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.